Have you ever wondered what happens when the flow of goods around the world comes to a halt? We're talking about everything from the food on your plate to the smartphone in your hand. The global supply chain crisis has affected us all, shifting markets, creating shortages, and reshaping industries. But in the midst of this chaos, who stands to gain and who is left behind? Let's explore the winners and losers of the global supply chain crisis. The global supply chain is the intricate network that moves raw materials, components, and finished goods from one place to another, connecting businesses, countries, and consumers. It's a system that most people take for granted until something goes wrong, like the supply chain disruptions that have been happening since the COVID-19 pandemic. But these disruptions didn't just start with the pandemic. Years of rising demand, trade tensions, and natural disasters had already put the system under pressure. The COVID-19 pandemic pushed the entire global supply chain to its breaking point. Ports around the world became overwhelmed with cargo ships waiting to dock, factories shut down, and labor shortages added fuel to the fire. At its peak, experts warned that the world could face shortages in everything from electronics to toys and even food. But as supply chains have slowly started to recover, it's becoming clear that some players are managing to adapt, while others are left struggling. While many industries have struggled during the supply chain crisis, tech giants like Apple, Amazon, and Tesla have, for the most part, managed to come out on top. The pandemic accelerated the shift toward digital, and companies that were already at the forefront of e-commerce and online services found themselves in a strong position. Amazon, for example, saw a massive increase in demand for its services as consumers flocked to online shopping. The company leveraged its extensive logistics network and expanded its warehouse capabilities to meet this surge in demand. Tech companies that produce consumer electronics, such as smartphones and laptops, also adapted by tightening their supply chains and securing key components. For instance, Apple worked closely with suppliers to ensure that crucial semiconductors for its devices were delivered on time, even as global chip shortages created bottlenecks. The disruption of global supply chains led many companies to reconsider their dependence on far-flung suppliers. Local and regional manufacturers have benefited from this shift. With rising shipping costs and delays in overseas production, businesses in Europe, the US, and Asia began reshoring their manufacturing operations or sourcing from nearby countries. This trend, known as nearshoring, is expected to continue growing as companies look to reduce their reliance on long, complex supply chains that leave them vulnerable to global disruptions. This has also been an opportunity for businesses specializing in just-in-time manufacturing, those that can quickly respond to changing demand and production needs. For example, automakers have shifted some of their production back to North America, benefiting suppliers that provide components like chips and electrical parts. E-commerce has been a major winner during the global supply chain crisis. Companies that specialize in logistics like FedEx, UPS, and DHL capitalized on the increased demand for home delivery of goods. FedEx and UPS especially saw a significant surge in online orders for everything from electronics to essential supplies, forcing them to innovate and expand their operations to keep up. Delivery times, once considered a luxury, became a point of competition, with companies vying to meet consumer expectations for faster and more reliable delivery. Commodity producers, particularly those in the energy, mining, and agriculture sectors, have seen their profits soar. With disruptions to the supply of goods, prices for essential raw materials like oil, copper, and agricultural products surged. For instance, energy prices skyrocketed as natural gas and oil production slowed down due to supply chain interruptions. Countries that are major producers of these commodities, like Saudi Arabia and Russia, have capitalized on the rising demand and high prices. Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, have been hit hard by the global supply chain disruptions. Unlike large corporations, SMEs often don't have the resources to absorb rising costs or secure priority access to key products. Many small businesses depend on global suppliers for materials and finished goods, and as shipping costs and delays rose, many found themselves unable to meet customer demands. For example, small manufacturers in the clothing and furniture industries struggled to source affordable raw materials and finished products. Many SMEs also faced difficulties when their suppliers in overseas factories couldn't keep up with demand or were forced to shut down due to COVID-19 restrictions. These businesses often lack the financial buffer or access to capital that larger companies have, meaning they were more vulnerable to price hikes and supply shortages. The retail sector has also felt the strain, particularly in industries like automotive, fashion, and furniture. With supply chains disrupted and raw materials scarce, many retail businesses found it difficult to maintain stock, leading to empty shelves and frustrated customers. Products like furniture and electronics became harder to find, and prices for everything from washing machines to vehicles surged. The global supply chain crisis caused a major increase in inflation, driving up prices for everyday goods. The price of food and household items has particularly been impacted, making it more difficult for low-income consumers to afford basic necessities. For instance, shortages of agricultural workers and issues in the food distribution network caused higher prices for products like vegetables, meats, and dairy. The automobile industry has been one of the hardest hit by the global supply chain crisis. A shortage of semiconductors, chips, crucial to modern car manufacturing, has led to production delays and plant shutdowns. Automakers such as Ford, GM, and Toyota had to adjust production schedules and even pause manufacturing lines for weeks at a time. With the chip shortage expected to continue well into 2023, car makers are focusing on adapting their models to use fewer chips, but they still face a significant supply chain problem. The result has been a slowdown in vehicle production, leading to fewer cars available for consumers and rising prices. Shipping and logistics companies have been on the front lines of the supply chain crisis. While some have benefited from the increased demand for shipping services, many others have struggled with rising costs, congestion at ports, and labor shortages. Additionally, digital technologies like artificial intelligence and automation are being employed to better predict and mitigate disruptions. Countries are also investing in infrastructure improvements to reduce dependency on foreign suppliers and ensure smoother trade flows. Whether it's expanding port capacity or improving labor conditions in shipping and logistics, these efforts will play a critical role in shaping the future of global trade.